So here we're going to download SQL Server Management Studio, or SSMS as most people refer to it as. Really simple. If we go to Google, download SSMS, and it'll bring up this window here. And we can browse the website and select the download link here. Once that's finished, we can open the exe and it will bring us up this window just here. And we can simply install it onto our PC. Now the thing to remember, there's SSMS and there's the SQL engine. So if I look at this is a SQL Server, SQL engine. This is what controls everything. This is what you query. This is what you look after. SSMS is just a tool to query that and look after that. There are other tools to do that, like in MySQL, you've got SQL Workbench. This is just the most popular tool for SQL Server. So try not to get those two confused, because, for example, we've got services here that run SQL. That hasn't got anything to do with SSMS. This is just a query SQL Server. So that's a simple install. So once that's installed and you're ready to go, let's move on. So once we've got SQL Server Management Studio installed, it should look something like this. We should have Object Explorer right over here. If we haven't, however, and it looks like this, we can click on View, click on Object Explorer, and it fires it up this way. Now to connect to our SQL instance, we are going to select on Connect, and we are going to connect to the database engine. We can fire that up, and got lots of options here. Localhost, I'm using this on a Windows PC, just on my local PC, so I can type in localhost and it will open up my local SQL instance. I've only got one SQL instance running, and this is what I'm opening. Alternatively, I can connect here, and if I'm working in a company environment, I can either type in the server name that I want to go to here and then connect to it, or I can go down here, I can browse for more, and this gives me the options of which instance are available to me. Now in a company environment, there might be 100 instances, so it might take a bit of time to browse everything. So it's always advisable to type in the server name that you know, but in this case, there's only one instance available to me, so it's nice and quick. I can type it in and I can press connect. Alternatively, if you're on a local PC like I am, you can just put a full stop. That is the same as a local host, and you can connect. So the instances you'll see, they're all very similar, they're all exactly the same. What you'll also notice is when I fire this up, I'm connecting with Windows Authentication. Now there is also SQL Server Authentication if you have a SQL ID. In most cases, if you're using a Windows PC to train and learn at home, Windows is fine. So in this case, we're going to be using Windows. So let's have a look at our SQL instance and see what we've got in here. We have got several nodes. So let's take a look at the databases node. Quite self-explanatory what's in here. We've got our system ones, which come with every instance of SQL Server. 99.9% of the time, we're not going to be changing anything in here. We're not going to be altering. This helps SQL Server, and it's essential for SQL Server being able to run. And if you want to go in for any interviews, brush up on what each of these do and what they're for and why they're essential, because those sort of questions are always asked in interviews. Then we've got AdventureWorks. This is something, and all of these are just ones I've installed myself. This comes from Microsoft. I've got a tutorial on that and how to install that. It's completely free and great for you to test and play around with and work out the ins and outs of SQL Server. Stack Overflow is a larger version, but it's from the Stack Overflow website, freely available. And then we've got these ones which I've just created myself for testing and playing around with. Now, within each of these, we've got several nodes, and they're all the same. We've got tables. This is what houses all the information in SQL that we want to query. And we can view properties of these. We can do all sorts of stuff with this. So we can view the permissions on it. We can look at our schemas, names, when it's created. And we've got views. Now, views are just like tables, really. I like to think of them as virtual tables because it might be a combination of these three tables, for example, and it might be a view, like a view employee table here. Further down, synonyms. Don't have any synonyms in here. Programmability contains all our stored procedures. This is used for updating and inserting. And again, if you're going for interviews, understand stored procedures and functions, because that's going to crop up. We've got those in there, and we've got lots of different types of functions, like your scalar functions and your aggregate functions. Then as we go further down, we've got security. This tells us who is allowed in to AdventureWorks and who isn't. And as we go further down, we've got security, which I will come to shortly. And we've got SQL Server, we've got server objects like link servers and triggers, which you'd only really use that if you're looking after a SQL instance in a professional environment. Same applies for replication and always on. They're both tabs for replicating anything in here really. Integration services is due to ETL. It's SQL Server Integration Services. Again, you'd only use that in a professional environment. And we've got SQL Server Agent used for running lots of jobs, which I'll come to shortly. And now we're going to come to one of my favourite bits in SSMS, Object Explorer Details. So to do that, we can hit that and hit F7 if we wanted. And that brings up Object Explorer Details. Or alternatively, we can go to View, Object Explorer Details there. Now what this shows, if we click on this node here, we can see pretty much the same thing, but depending on the node, and it will change, and we can see all sorts of information, and it's like a table of info. So we can right click on these columns here, and I can remove these columns. This is how we customize our view. We can remove the name if we wanted, and let's get rid of all these. And I might want to see who the owner of AdventureWorks is, so I could click on that. And I might see the size of it. And I might want to see whether it's read-only. All sorts of information like this. And the great thing here is we can chop and change this, so I could click on AdventureWorks. There won't be as many options here, but once I click down into AdventureWorks and click on Tables maybe, this gives us a whole view. And I can add file group, owner, I can all these things here. And this is great when you're working with SQL Server, because I can order it and I can see how big tables are, which ones have got big row counts. So let's have a look at Stack Overflow, because that's quite big. So we can order and we can see largest row counts, largest space, how much index size we've got. And we can click, say up here, we can look at what space is available, which is also handy if you're working in a professional environment. As I said, you can do this for every tab. You can do it for your views, your synonyms. So my suggestion here is have a play around with this, customize it, and use it exactly how you want to do it, because it's extremely handy when working in a professional environment. And next we're going to come to the Security tab, as I said. Now Security tab, quintessential when you're using SQL Server. So we're going to expand this. We've got a number of things here, such as audits and roles. But the logins one is arguably the most important and the one you'll come in contact with most. This tells us, because there's a lot of confusion around this, but logins is what gets you into the server. The confusion is they then get mapped to users. So as you can see, there's no users in AdventureWorks at the minute. Now, if we've got SQL login here, we can right click and we can look at the properties of a login. We can see what roles they have at a server level. So that's just a standard access at the minute. And then we can map them where we want them to go. So we might just give them access to AdventureWorks. So in this case, I'm just going to grant this login access to AdventureWorks 2019. So what that means is when this person logs in, they will see this complete list over here. And if they try to access any of this, it'll be denied because they aren't granted access to it. If I go down here and I grant, let's say I grant it owner access, what we'll do is, you see, if these logins here, you can see there's no users attached there. Now if I then grant it access, grant it owner access. It's now allowed to log in as a user. So your logins grant access to the server, and they map to a login to give you access to whether it's AdventureWorks or Arc Music. Likewise, I can revoke people's access from down here. Go there and remove it, and it's gone. So SQL Security is a whole tutorial in itself, so we won't go into lots about it, but that's the premise of it, how to grant access to what areas on SQL, because you can be very granular in what you do. You can, these roles here, we can grant them server roles, and we can just allow someone to do just certain things like just read or just write, even if you wanted. So understanding login and security is essential, but this is where it's handled. So let's have a look at querying SQL Server. That's why we're here. That's why we use SSMS. 99% of the time we want to query what's contained in SQL. So we can highlight the server and we can press new query. If I hover over it, it shows a shortcut, Control and N. So I can press Control and N and it'll bring me up a new query window. Alternatively, I can just press new query and it'll bring me up a new query window. Generally, once I've had my query written, I like to use Control N, a bit quicker. Now up here, we've got master. The master's system. We don't really generally query that too much. Let's say I wanted to query AdventureWorks 2019. What I'd do is I would hover over here and I can drop, and then I can select AdventureWorks, and I can do the query that everyone probably knows about, and that's select star from. And if I browse down here to my tables, I might want to look at human resources .employee. So human resources is my schema. Now schemas are like containers that hold certain bits of information. So these are all tables and they're all about human resources. These tables are all contained within person, and they can talk to each other, that's no problem, but that just helps clear up what each of the tables are for. So using my Intellisense, as soon as I press full stop, I get an option for which table I want to query, and I can browse, look through that. I've got my views here, and if you see the object change the image from a table to a view, we're going to go to human resources.employee, and I'm going to query that. So I can press execute, and if we hover over that, we can press F5 as well, and that'll do the same thing. And this brings us up a whole list of columns and rows that we can browse. This gives us every row in the table. And if we look down here, we can see we've got 290 rows. We can see that we're querying AdventureWorks 2019, and these numbers here are how long it took to run the query. So that was an instant query. Very common for that to take a lot longer. This is my server instance, and if you look, bracket 53, that's my SPID, that's my session ID. So it knows that I'm ID 53 that's running this query. Everyone who queries it will have a unique ID as well. So now let's use my shortcut. Let's say I want to query master this time. Now I could change it to master, but if I don't want to, I can use the use option. And my Intellisense will give me an option. I can terminate that. As soon as I execute that, if you notice up here, it changes it. So if I did this, select star from sys.databases, and I can query that. Now it's worth remembering that if I'm running a query such as, let's say I'm running this for example, and I'm running that against master, it is going to error. So we can see our errors that we've got here, and that's bound to happen. So we can change that to get to run against what we want it to run against. Perfect. Now as you'll see down here, we've got the results tab, and we've got this tab, which tells us the output of our query, how long it took, number of rows affected, and the results that we've got. Just likewise, if I was to run, let's say I did master in here, it will also provide us with an error. Provides us with the error. Now we can show more statistics here if we want. We can use statistics IO, and what that'll do, that'll give us more info, how many reads it does, and this is really good for performance tuning, but whether it's scanned, whether it's seeked, and we can do statistics time on as well, and that'll give us even more info. How much CPU time, how long it took to run. Again, this is used heavily with performance tuning, and we can also right click, go to query options, and we can set some of these within here. So we can set statistics time, the IO, and various other set options that we can set within there. Now here's another thing to remember. To do this, we don't have to type it in if we don't want it. I can go to here and just drag it, and I can run that by highlighting it, and it just runs that one line of code. If I just run these two, it'll just run these 2 lines of code, or I could press this and it'll just run everything in the window. So this is when you're working with code that's got hundreds and hundreds of lines. Sometimes you only want to run 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, in which case you can highlight it, press F5 or press execute, and you'll get the same result. As I was saying earlier, finally I'm going to show you a quick shortcut, Control and N, bring me up a new query window like this, which is a lot quicker, I think, than going up here and selecting your query that way. It will automatically select AdventureWorks because that's the one I ran it from. Likewise, if I was in Stack Overflow here and I press Control N, it's going to remember my settings from before, and we're back in there. I hope that clears that up. So let's have a look at SQL Server Agent. In SQL Express, you don't get SQL Server Agent, so it may not appear for you depending on which version of SQL you've got. But in a company environment, you will see this if you're using enterprise or standard SQL versions. And this enables us to run jobs. So in here, it's just a couple of jobs here. And these might be little tasks we do, like we might want to insert into AdventureWorks every hour to tell it the time. We might want to run stuff on schedule, or we might want to update stuff. So in which case, rather than us doing this manually, we can create jobs and we can set things on a timer. So in here, I've got a PowerShell job. We can name it, decide who runs, we can group it by category. We can add the steps into it, so we can have multiple steps, and we can tell it to run on a schedule. So I might put hourly, and I could recur it every day, once every hour. We can schedule it to run pretty much how we want. It's really good. As you can see, the last result of this, we can view the history of it. We've got some successes, and we've got some jobs that have failed. That's pretty standard with all jobs that you'll see. And with that, we can have alerts, we can have operators and proxies, which I won't go into here, but effectively that's telling which jobs you want to run under a separate user ID. And we've got logs as well, which you'd expect to see. And this just gives us a list of the jobs. As with a lot of areas of SQL, we can look at the properties and we can start to set up connections and the histories, and we can also add people like we did in the security. We can add people into certain SQL Server Agent roles. So we're looking here and we can add them into these roles to give them operator roles or just reader or just a user. That's what SQL Server Agent does. So let's have a look at a really popular part of SSMS that people like to know, and that's customizing their environment. So up here we can go to tools and go to options, and we've got all these options that we can set here. So a really popular one people like to do, they like to change the color theme. Now if you look online, there's loads of pre-made templates. Some of them are awesome. It comes straight straight off with just these 4 options. We can change that to dark. And if I run that here, you can see that my new query, if I did a query here, we can look and the results pane is still as it was, but this is a new colour. It's a lot easier on the eyes. If you're working there all day, a lot of people prefer it like this because it's just easier on their eyes. It stops them getting headaches and stuff. From here, we can go even further. We can look at options again, and we can go to fonts and colours, and we can change a lot of these pre-made, preset ones to change our text, our selected text, and our line numbers. We can change all these sorts of things in here, down there. So you have a play around with that, see what you like. I advise having a look online and finding a template that looks wicked and installing it. It's just a little file into a folder in your install. Another thing we can do, we can look at line numbers. This is also really handy. So if we go down to text editor, then we go down to transact SQL, got the line numbers tick here. So we enable that checkbox and press OK. So we can, my new query even will give me line numbers. That's really handy because as you work with more code, some lines of code are going to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lines long, and it's easier to look at each line number to work out where you are or what you've got referred back to, rather than scrolling through and trying to remember. So I strongly advise you enabling that. There's more that we can do in here. You could spend hours and hours just going through all of these, to be honest. We can look at query execution and the separator. We can change the wording of that if we really wanted. So when you see code where it's, let's go back to this one here, get that, and it terminates and it will do the next line of code. You can change that wording if you really wanted. I never have, but it's another option. And this is a really important one, I think, implicit transactions. So if we go down to SQL Server and then ANSI, we've got implicit transactions. So let me explain a little bit about that. Implicit, any transaction has a start and it has an end. Now in a query window, you don't really see this. It starts and it finishes, and the transaction can be either committed or it can be rolled back to what it was previously prior to that. Now implicit transactions, when they aren't turned on, it will just auto commit everything. Now to check what you're currently running it as, you can right click and you can look at your query options, and it brings up a smaller view of the tools and options view we looked at before. And going down to ANSI, we can see that my implicit transactions is off. So if I do this, let's change that to Stack Overflow so it works. There you go, we can see that gives me the top 10. And if I run this, it's absolutely fine. Change it. So then let me show you how implicit transactions work and the problems it can cause. Over in this window here, we're running this. Now if I put implicit transactions on, I can run this and I have to commit it. For example, let's say I changed it to teachers. I'll run this. Let's have a look at it. You can see it's enabled, but if I roll it back, it hasn't changed at all. Now what's great about that is when you're working, if you suddenly run this and you think, no, it's the wrong bit of code, you've got a little safety net, so you can roll that back. But if you don't commit or roll back, it causes a block on the table. So now if I run this, it's not returning it at all, because this transaction is still open, it hasn't been committed and it hasn't been rolled back. Now this leads me on to the next part, which is activity monitor. This is fantastic. So if you open this, let's change this color theme to make it a bit easier. So what we can see here, we've got head blocker, and we can see that it's being blocked. We can see this transaction that we're trying to run is being blocked by this session ID, which is number 51. So if we look down here, hovering over that, it'll show session number 51. So what we can do here, if I suddenly committed this transaction suddenly completes. So the reason you should look out for that is because if you're working in a production environment, implicit transactions are great to have as a safety net to enable you to commit or roll back in case you've made a mistake, but you can cause problems with other people if you forget to do it. And I just want to add as well, once you've committed something, you can't roll it back. And in the same respect, you can't, if I roll something back, I can't suddenly change my mind and commit it again because there's no transaction to start off with. So it has to be one or the other. But that, I strongly advise, if you're querying, having it on, having implicit transactions on, because you can update too much sometimes and that can be catastrophic. So here we're going to look at scripting objects to code. So I can expand this, and I can expand AdventureWorks, and I can expand tables. I can right click on any table and I could script to create. What that'll do is that'll give me the code exactly how to create that table, including my constraint down here. I've also got the option to drop and create, or just drop my table. And what that'll do is that'll check if it exists, and if so, it's going to drop the table. The only reason that wouldn't work is if you've got various constraints from other tables that rely on error log in this case, and then it wouldn't let you do it. We can also do that with views. Now, as we know, views are glorified select statements, so we've got a few more options here. So we can just alter a view if we wanted. Just have a look at that. And I could just create a random column called, let's call it random. We can see that's all the code we need. And I can select from here and it would have my random column over here. And likewise, if we want to, we can just remove that. So it's gone. And what's really great about this, we can obviously do this with stored procedures as well, and stored procedures will provide us with alternative options such as execute. But what we can do, let's say I wanted to perform a specific task. So tasks, backup, and let's have a look at this. So once we've set our options, everything we want to do here, we can hit the drop down and we can script a new query window. To do that, we can just press this here if you wanted. Brings us up our code. Alternatively, we can do it to file, to clipboard. And the one I really like is script the action to a job. So I can select that and I'm going to call it, let's call it that. I'm going to change the name to SA, change the category, change the schedule. So in the schedule, I'll add a new and I'll call it once a day. Going every day, and it runs at, let's say it runs at 11 o'clock at night. Create that schedule. If I want, I can set some alerts and notifications, add that. And then down here, we should have our job just here. So automatically, saved ourselves a little bit of time. We've got our schedule, we've got our steps. We can open that here, change the name if we want. And it's given us all the code that we need to do. Those are a few time-saving hacks by scripting objects to code, which I think are superb. So here's another one of my favourite little tabs, registered servers. If this isn't here, you go to view, registered servers just here. And we can slide it around and we can pin it where we want really. I'm going to always keep it over here. And this little pin here means it's pinned, so wherever I connect, it stays where it is. Or my preference is to auto hide it. So I'll stay there, and if I want to click here, it just auto hides for me, which is great. Now what registered servers does is it's particularly handy if you work in a company and you've got tens or hundreds of servers. Now normally to connect, I'm going to open this and I'm going to type in localhost and connect that way. But what you can do here is you can create server groups. So I might create a group and I'll call it my SQL Server. And I've got a nice little folder there, and I'm going to create a new server registration. And what this does is I'm going to say, right, I want to connect to localhost. I'm going to use Windows authentication. These are my properties. In this case, I'm going to leave it as is. We can change these connection properties and parameters if we want. You rarely have to do that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to save and test it. Does it work? Yeah. Now I'm going to save it. So what this means is, if I then connect, let's get rid of this. What I can do is I can file it. I'll just click on that and it opens. So let's get rid of my connections. And I can create another one in there as well if I want. And I might do the full stop I showed you earlier, save that, and it auto connects for me. Now you've got to imagine in a company environment, you've got 30 servers in there. What you can also do, which is really quick, really easy, nice little hack, you can right click here and select Object Explorer, which is this little tab up here, and it will open the pair of them, which is far quicker. Where I work, we've got about 100 servers, so I can get lots and lots of different server groups. So this might be QA environment, and I might add all the QA SQL servers in there. Then I might create another one called test environment, and those are all my test servers. Far quicker than opening it all manually, and a great little SQL Server Management Studio hack. So here's another one of my favourite parts of SSMS. That's Template Explorer, which I hide here. And as with all these little windows, you can go to View, Template Explorer, which is Control, Alt and T. Now what this does is this gives us a load of pre-made templates to get an idea of code, reusable code that we can use. So we can open this and it provides us how to do that. And if we've got things like creating indexes, we can create a clustered column store index, and it shows us exactly how to do that. And a nice simple example might be roles, which would be found here. So we could create a role, and we might want to change this to, say, my driving license DB, and I could change this, create the role here, and I could create it as new role, run this. And likewise, I can just change a bit of this down here. I could run it on a schema, DBO to new role. I could grant the relevant permissions. Likewise, I might want to remove some of these if I wanted. And that provides us with the script that we'd need to be able to do that. Likewise, it's got alter role where we can add users to it. But you have a browse through here. It's got all sorts of useful, handy bits of code that we can use from time to time. And one thing I like to do is I like to create a folder in there. So I might call it my folder, and I can create a subfolder, and I might call it, I don't know, queries, for example. And let's say I want to save that bit of code that I've just done there. I can create a new template, call it DB role, can edit that, put my code in there, save it, and just means if I've got something really handy, like a really nice script I've written, I can save it here for future use to save me rewriting everything. It saves me loads of time. It's really good to automate things and just speed up your work through every day, really. So here's another little tip we can use. If we want to update something, this is always the preferred method, using code. It's a lot more secure, it's a lot quicker. You should always really update using this. So I can query this table here, and we can see the address lines are all exactly the same, and I could run that and it will show us we've updated it to update terrace 2. Now another way of doing that, let's set it back to what we were. Now what we can do is we can right click on a table and we can do edit top 100 rows, which brings this up, and I can go into each of these columns here and I can select that and I can press 2 there. Let's change a few numbers, press enter, and if I run this now, it's updated it. I don't advise doing this. It's rare. I've only seen someone use this once. You should always really update it in code, but it's possible. It's an option, and it's the options there for you if you want to use it.